welcome back. In this video we're going to look at creating graphs in Google Sheets. So basically we've got all this nice data here. This is favorite ice cream flavors. So this data comes from surveys we did with class 5 A, B, and C and class 6 A, B, and C. Okay, so let's start with something simple. If I wanted to just make a graph of the 5A data, I could select starting with the first piece of data I want to include. So that would be chocolate. And I would drag to the last piece of data I want to include, which would be the number 3 under Other. So you can see I have a variety of flavor choices: chocolate, vanilla, strawberry, cookies and cream, cookie dough, and then Other for anyone whose favorite was not one of the listed flavors. Once I have the data selected, I simply say Insert Chart. And it's produced a nice bar chart for me. There's a lot of options I can adjust here, and we'll go through those one at a time. First of all, you have 2 tabs under your chart editor. The first is Setup, and this is basic information about the chart. Right here, it's telling you that it has selected, it is including data from cells A1 to G2. So even though I told it to go to B, it kind of figured out that it wanted to include stuff from column A, and that's where you get this 5A label up here, and we can adjust that in a minute. Okay, it's telling me that the x-axis information, or these labels down here, are coming from cells A1 through G1. Okay, a lot of times with these charts, what you really want is this A1 cell to be blank as it is here. It makes things a lot simpler and makes them work a lot better. Okay, in series, it's saying what rows of information do I have, and it's looking over here for this label and finds this 5A, and we'll adjust this in a minute. I could add series here, so I could add, say, oh, why don't we do cells rows 2 and 3, so class 5A and 5B. You can adjust that here by clicking Add Series, but there are easier ways to do that, and we'll look at that in a minute. We can switch rows and columns. We don't want to do that. Use column A as headers. Use row 1 as labels. So I can check or uncheck these, but for the most part, if I've selected it correctly, for the most part, I'm not going to have to do that kind of work. Okay, the real opportunity to customize this, because it's awfully simple and basic here, is using the Customize tab here. So first of all, there's a chart style. There's a background color for the chart area, so it's white right now, and that's not a bad idea, but if I wanted to make it a light gray, I could simply pick that here. It's telling me the font that it's using. I don't have to. I could go to a Verdana font. I could go to a Comic Sans if I had younger children. Okay. Maximize is, right, it's just filling up all that space. I generally don't use it. There's a 3D option. Okay, so if you want it to look a little different, and now this is a column chart here, but we do have a variety of other charts that we could use, and the 3D is probably more appropriate for some than others. Compare mode we'll come back to. Now, chart axis and titles. So you have your y-axis and your x-axis, so we can change those in various ways. Let's look at that now. The first is the title of the entire chart. So 5A is fine, but I think I need more information there. And I always tell my students, if you lose that, by the way, you can always get it back by Edit Chart over here. I always tell my students that someone should be able to interpret your chart without you standing there. So it should be documented well enough that the information is clear and accessible. So in this, I'm going to say favorite ice cream flavors of 5A. Okay. I can individualize. If I wanted, I could change the font for only the title here, I've set the whole thing to Comic Sans, but I could come in here and I could say, no, I'd like this to be Georgia. I talked to the kids about this, and although the options are there, it's not always a good idea. I mean, putting a lot of different inconsistent formatting here is going to be distracting from the main goal of your chart, which is to present the information you've collected. Title and font size, it's automatically doing that for me now, but I could come in here and just say I want it to be a 12 or a 14, etc. I can bold, I can italicize, let's shut that one off, and I can change the alignment. Okay, so again, I'm working just with the title now, and I've got a color, I can change that. Okay, all of those things. Now also under chart title, I can include a subtitle if I wanted. You can see it's over there, and then I'm going to be able to format that. So that's a good option if you need it. Horizontal axis title. I generally tell students that they should do this, especially when the data is not clear. Okay, so now I've labeled what these things are. They are, in fact, flavors. Vertical axis title. Well, that's 5A is inappropriate there, so I'm just going to say student votes, student choices, number of students who pick that. All of that's fine. Get this back. Okay, and you can go through all of these things. Get back to customize here. You can go through all of these individual things and do that type of formatting on. So now you can see that this is student votes. Yeah, I'm going to keep everything the same, except that I am going to pick that matching color over there. Should I bold it? Yeah, let me bold it. That looks good. And I can always go back and say that's the vertical axis. I should have done this on my horizontal axis as well. Chosen the color, bolded it. Those do look a little small. So maybe in this particular case I'll beef up the sizes just a little bit. The way you present data is very important, and the way that your students learn to present data is very important. So having a clear, visually accessible, well-organized chart is imperative. Learning how to do this well is really important, because if your data isn't presented well, it's less effective. Okay, now the series. You can see that right now the series is just 5A, okay, and I could change the color of that. The axis is on the left. I could have put the axis on the right. I mean, that's not terribly standard, so I don't tend to do that. And I could also format a data point. So I could say add, and I'm going to select this 5A, that's chocolate. Okay, so there's a data point, and maybe I'm going to turn the color of that one brown. And then I'm going to add a data point. Vanilla I don't really need to worry about because there's nothing there. I'm going to go to strawberry. Now I've got the strawberry data point, and perhaps that's more of a strawberry color. Cookies and cream is going to be a tough one, because I'm not going to find something here with white and black specks in it. So just, maybe this is a case where, well, I'll go for the Oreo color, whatever. So you can see that students can customize these. Sometimes it makes sense. If you were working in Excel, you'd have even more control. You could load graphics into there. So it's pretty cool actually if you download it and do it. I mean, I could put chocolate ice cream in here, and strawberries in here, and Oreos in here, etc. But again, those are bells and whistles. Do they really, really seriously add to my data? Well, they could be nice and they could be attractive, but they're probably not absolutely necessary. Okay, you can add data labels. So by turning on data labels, it's telling me what the count is for each one right here. Of course, I can also read it off my my axis, my numbers over here, so students have to make a decision as to whether that's something that's prudent to do. You have a trend line here, probably something that might be more appropriate for older students. And in this case, it doesn't really make a lot of sense because this data, these are kind of random flavors. So they happen to be stacked in an order where it's tending to decrease, but it's not really a valid trend line. Error bars are another concept that really is more advanced and would certainly be for high school students and maybe even beyond. Basically, it's including a range, a reasonable range of what the error might be for these things. Right now it's randomly set to 10%. Very often people are going to use things like standard deviation to set this, so really not something appropriate for unless you're in statistics or higher level math. Okay, we have some settings we can include for the legend, such as the font, the size, label, whether it be bold, italics, etc. So we don't have, if we look here, you're going to see that you really don't have a legend over here, and that's because the data is kind of too simple for it, but we'll take a look at that in a minute. In a case where that's not true. Horizontal axis, so that's here. And the only thing I'm going to do here is if I'm going to go with this color scheme, then let's follow it all the way through. But I can do those other changes as well if I need to. I could reverse the order, so now I've moved other over here and chocolate over there. In most cases, not necessary. I can slant labels if it makes things more legible or readable. Okay, I can also go to my vertical axis. There are some adjustments there. You'll notice that most of it is similar. You can change the colors of things on your vertical axis, etc. Bolds, etc. But also you can set a minimum and maximum value for that scale, and that can be important. Let's see, the smallest number is 3, so if I were to set this to 2 and 8, it kind of makes this difference look greater than it actually is. Go back to 0. So this is not the best example, but you'll notice sometimes when you see graphs, the x-axis is not only always set to a 0 starting point. And this would be appropriate if I had data that existed in a relatively narrow range, but that range was not near 0. Like if my scores were always between 350 and 380, well, I probably wouldn't start this at 0 and end it at 400, because there'd be very little fluctuation in here, so I could kind of zoom in on it. But that's an important concept to talk to your students about. People do use data to try to make arguments and to make points, and you can format this graph truthfully, but still make a certain impression with the data. And one of the ways you can do that is by working with a scale over here, and that's something that students should be aware of. So maybe in this case I just want a little headroom over the top, and I just put a 10 in there, so I can see that there's space above here. Okay, important to discuss with students because people can be manipulated by technically truthful data. Okay, last set of options here is for grid lines. These are called major grid lines. You'll notice that because it's set to auto, it decided that increments of 2 were appropriate for this graph, but you can take control over that if you wanted. I could say instead of 2, I would like this to be 4. Okay, not probably the best choice right there. So I'll just set it to auto. I can change the grid line color. Kind of a minor point, but there could be times where it makes the data more visible, more easily accessible. And then these are minor grid lines. So you can put in smaller gradations. Here, I don't know if it's necessary, but I did put in the minor grid lines at 1 so I can actually see that this is 3. This wouldn't have been terribly hard to determine without them, which is why they're often left out, but there are times when you're going to find it useful. Okay, so quick review. Under Edit Chart, you have the Setup tab where the major settings are made, such as the range, etc., and then the Customize tab where you can do all this detailing. You would get even more options in Microsoft Word, but in a way I like this, because if I was making a proposal to a planning board or something, I'd want every little bell and whistle to tweak it, but this lets us focus on the important concepts without students being distracted by the additional settings, which aren't always critical. Okay, other options within this menu. I can delete this chart. I can download it as a PNG, which is a graphic file like a JPEG or a GIF, and that's fine. I can download it as a PDF, so it's no longer editable, but you get it in that very locked-in format, or as a scalable vector graphic. And basically, the difference between this and a regular image file is that these are created by equation, so they're scalable. In other words, if I needed something for a big poster and I downloaded this PNG, it came down a certain size and I needed to stretch it to fill the poster, it may become pixelated or fuzzy or unclear, whereas this scalable vector graphic will not. You're not going to use this often, but it's nice to have that option. You can publish the chart, which would simply mean getting a link directly to that chart so that you could share it that way. You can copy it and paste it so you can get 2 versions of the same thing, and then take the second one and tweak it slightly. That's great for comparisons. Like if I want to show this with alternate vertical scales, I can make that comparison without having to rebuild the entire chart. I can move it to its own sheet, which I'll show you in a moment, or I could add alt text to it. And alt text is great for a graphic that's going to be embedded in a website, because all graphics and websites should have this alt text. Alt text should be in standard language, like graph of favorite ice cream flavors in 5A. Because if a visually impaired user is accessing the site, this is what the reader needs in order to give that user context as to what the graphic is. It'll read back to them that there's a graphic there, but without meaningful alt text, they could potentially be confused or not know the meaning of that graphic or the context of it. So alt text is always important. Okay, let's go into moving into its own sheet. If you didn't want it laying over the top here, you simply say move to its own sheet. You can see now it's no longer in the favorite ice cream flavors. It's here, and you can rename that. So I could name that to whatever I wanted. If you want to get it back, it's a little tougher. There's no button in here to move it back to the sheet. So what you have to do instead is you have to copy it up here, come back to the sheet, paste it in, and now you've got a copy back in the sheet. And you can see certain things like the size changed, but the rest of the settings should be. Come on. The rest of the settings should be fine. So there you go. Okay, I'm actually going to delete this one. Now, a couple of other options. I've got this whole thing built in that's wonderful, but let's say that I decide now that I really wanted it to be the 5th grade, and I don't want to rebuild the entire thing. Well, that would be a case where I would go back to the setup, and I could reselect the data. So I'm going to click in that box, and I'm simply going to select all the 5th grade data and say OK. And you can see now it's reset my color, my individual color, because it needed to, because it's assigned one color to one class, another color to another class, a third color to a third class. So we've got a key of sorts here. However, it's not giving me a lot of information at the moment. So what I want to do is under Customize, Legend, let's set this color to something that we're going to be able to see easily. And there you go. 5A, B, and C. Okay, so now I can see by color what choices were made in each class. Now, what if I wanted the data from 5A and I wanted the data from 6A, but I didn't want the data in between? So let's take a quick look at that. We're going to go to Edit Chart. Here I can, edit the data range here, and I can do it a couple of ways. One is I can say, well, my first selection for data really shouldn't be A1 to G4, it should be A1 to G2. So if I say OK to that, it gets me back to just selecting this block of data here. But now I can add another data range. So here I'm just going to select that. Let's see. So it's going up to G5, so that's good. A5, it goes A1 to G2 and A5 to G5. And now you can see I've just got 5A and 6A. An alternate way to do that when you're originally creating the chart, or you can do it here as well, is I'm going to trash this and I'm going to select this just in a slightly different way. I will select the first set of data that I want. I'm going to hold down a Control key on my keyboard and I'm going to make the other selection, and you can see I made a little mistake there. I went down to 6, but you can see that it's selecting multiple ranges for me. So I'll just keep that at 5, and I get that same chart that I had before. Okay, I think you understand all the basic concepts of formatting. Let's look at another couple of charts very, very quickly. This time I'm going to go over to weather. I want to get these as highs and lows, so I'm going to select this data over here. I'm going to say insert a chart. It brings it up as a column chart, which is not really okay because my data is showing changes in data over time. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Changes over time are really more appropriately done as a line graph. But here, you can see it's listed as a column chart here. I can simply pick the type of chart I'd want. It's giving me the suggested ones up here. Whereas, this is a column chart. This is a stacked column showing things together. Here's a line and here's a stacked line. So I'm just going to pick my line chart, and there you go. I'm not going to go through all the trouble of putting in, adjusting my formatting, my temperatures, my ranges, all the things I did on the first, because you can work your way through this now, and you'll know how to do that. But you can see I've just converted that to a line chart. My third graph over here, I've collected birthday month information. So I did a little survey with the class, and I said that a little mistake in here. This should be December. Okay, I basically said how many people are born in December, how many people in January. I totaled those numbers up from multiple classes. So I have my 138 students here, and 7 of them were born in December, 8 in January, 15 in February, etc. So I could take this data. I'm going to eliminate the selection on total because that would kind of mess it up a little bit. I'm going to insert a chart over here. Gives me a bar chart. That's not really what I wanted, but it figured out that maybe in this case what I want is a pie chart. By the way, these are suggested up at top, but you get more detailed choices down at the bottom. So I'm going to pick a pie chart here. Now, what I find about this is nice. It's showing some differences, but it's a little confusing. There's a lot of pieces to this pie. They're relatively similar. They seem to range from somewhere around 5% to somewhere around 12%. So perhaps I can find a more useful way of doing this. And what I've done over here is I've just totaled up the winter birthdays, December, January, and February, and I brought them over here. So I'm just summing up those 3, and then here are my spring birthdays, my summer birthdays, and my fall birthdays. Let's take a look at that. Okay, and now you can see there's still a fairly even distribution among them. 28% as a high and 21 as a low. But sometimes it might make sense to process your data a little bit before you actually create the graph. You will notice I'm not going to go through everything here, but something like a pie chart might have slightly different settings than another chart. I can also, if I come back to setup that's a pie, notice there are 3D options here. This is actually a nice one. Pie charts in 3D give a nice view. And I can go through all my formatting, etc. Notice when I mouse over, I get my count and my percentage, which is nice. But some of the things that I can do here with the pie chart, let's see, under legend, we've got the legend set up this way. That's auto, that's nice, but what if I just wanted it at the top instead? And it's simply telling me now the colors. So that would be one way to look at it. If I want, I can adjust those colors here under series, so that's saying winter is blue. Oh, that seems pretty reasonable. Spring maybe should be green for things growing. Fall, let's go with an orange. And summer's hot, so summer can be, did I get that? No. Summer can be the red hot color. Okay, again, under pie chart here are the individual settings, so I can actually give this a donut hole if I want. So I can make it that type of chart if I'd like. Don't need to. And then there's also this slice label option. So basically I've got them up here. I could put them on here, which I don't think is necessary, but I have other choices. Like, in other words, I could put the value on there, so there were a total of 30, somewhere between 30 and 39 in each. I could put the percentage on there instead, or I could put the value in percentage. So depending on what you find useful, or having students justify what they think is most useful. Is this too confusing to have both? Is it the percentage really is the thing that I'm interested in? Or, have a reason for the decisions that you make. Okay, that about covers it for charts. The only other thing that I would say with charts is note that there are a lot of different types besides your column charts and your pie charts and your line charts. So they're worth exploring, especially if that's something that your students are working with. But even if not, sometimes showing them an alternate way of representing data can be very valuable, get them to think in different ways.